Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everyone to today's special broadcast of the Kev Baker Show. I'm really excited about today's show. We were kind of losing track of time there before we got started because tonight we really do have a marathon ahead of us, and it's going to be something completely different. And I say that for a number of reasons. Over the years I've been doing this show, you will all know that I've formed a really good working relationship and a good friendship with the spiritual warrior, Bill Bean. And Bill comes on once a month. He's very gracious to grant us his time. And he comes on here in between being on Coast to Coast, TV shows like A Haunting, and we get into all the kind of demonic forces that are at play today, and in particular, the ones that Bill has first-hand experience with when he travels across the country doing deliverances, and what I call exorcisms when he goes and clears houses for people who have fallen victim to these dark forces. We also, from time to time, which is quite rare for somebody that speaks on the topics that Bill does, we get into UFOs, we get into the paranormal, and from time to time, we have even dipped our toe into the whole topic of Bigfoot. We've never really covered it in any great detail, though. And me being me, and Bill being Bill, we don't like to do things at half measures. So tonight, we are going to present to you what, in my opinion, from the things I've been looking at in research to this show today, is one of the most credible sightings that there has ever been of what is called the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yowie, Yeti. It goes by many names and is on many, many continents. And tonight we're going to get into one of the most fascinating stories. So Bill Bean is here with me. And of course, Bill is the author of a number of books, and he has just done the 10-year anniversary revamp of Dark Force. And this is the story of Bill's life. We'll be getting into that a little bit tonight on a later show as well. But Bill is also, like I said, he appears on A Haunting, the TV show, and is a regular guest with George Norrie over on Coast to Coast. So that's why it's really special, A, that Bill comes on here at all, and B, he's a good friend and he comes on once a month. So Bill, without me wasting any more time, because we've still to add in a couple of very special guests to tonight's show. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Brother Kev, for having me back. And this is really, this is going to be something a little different for the two of us because, I'm used to just being the two of us or Joe or someone else, but this is really going to be something to where we're adding in Mike and Brian, and this is a compelling story. Like you said, I believe, like you, that this is certainly, in my opinion, one of the most credible reports of a close encounter with a Bigfoot Sasquatch creature that I've ever heard. So I'm excited about this.
Absolutely. And we're going to be bringing a gentleman on that introduced you to tonight's very special guest, and his name is Mike Suppa. Could you tell us a little bit about Mike while we're waiting for him to join us on the call?
Well, I love him dearly. He's a brother, and we've known each other for quite a while now, and we met when my first book, the first version of Dark Force, came out. Mike happened to be, he was looking for another book. He was on, I think, Amazon.com or something like that, looking for another book. And he happened to see my book, and then he reached out, and we became fast friends right after that, and it's amazing, Kev, because the three of us have this brotherly connection. It's amazing how God brings people into your life like that. Everything is for a reason. And, he's been a dear friend and brother ever since. And it is because of Mike that, can you hear me, Kev?
Yeah, I can hear you there.
Is this Brian?
This is Brian. Yeah, Brian's over here.
Hi, Brian. We're doing great. And we're just getting ready to intro you. We were talking about how Mike and I came to know each other, and then how Mike and you came to know each other. And we're here on this show tonight, and you and I are connected because of Mike Suppa. And it's great, and it's a real pleasure to talk with you. And thank you so much for being on with us. I'll tell you, both Kev and I have really looked forward to talking with you about your experience. So, Kev, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we're still waiting for Mike to join us right now. But we do have Brian on the show. And Brian is very, very key to tonight's information because, like I was saying, folks, for me, this is one of the most credible sightings, in my opinion, ever of a Bigfoot, of a Sasquatch. So, for people out there, let me just introduce who Brian is. And in August of 1976, police officer Brian Gosselin had a face-to-face encounter with a Bigfoot-type character on Abair Road in Whitehall, New York. Now, this event set off a firestorm of publicity, and his encounter became a landmark case that has withstood the test of time. Brian has been featured on Monster Quest and more recently was the subject of the Small Town Monsters documentary film. Now, it says here, The Beast of Whitehall, Although keeping a low profile, Brian continues to be an avid researcher and has conducted many investigations in the Whitehall area and surrounding Adirondack Mountains, and I'll get Brian to correct that in a moment, with some impressive results. Now, after all this time, he has just released his first book, which is written by his wife, Sue Gosselin, regarding the encounter and many other pieces of information about that event and ongoing events in and around the Whitehall area. And this is stuff that has never been released before. And the reason that Brian has written this book after so many years, 1976, the year I was born, was because in the time that has passed since then, after the interviews that Brian has given, and because of all the stories that have been embellished and some parts missed out along the way, Brian wanted to set the record straight. And he's here with us tonight. Brian, thank you so, so much for your time, sir.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, now, in my introduction, I did say that this, for me, has to be one of the most credible eyewitness reports of a Bigfoot. And I say that not to dismiss other eyewitness reports just offhand, but it's the fact that your job, your background. Talk to us about who you were or what was happening back in 1976, Brian, and what happened back in August in particular.
Well, it was a nice August night, and it all started because it was a boring night. I'd already checked the doors and make sure all the business were locked up, so on and so forth. And I was operating radar on Route 4. That's the main route that goes through Whitehall. And when you work in a small community, which this is very small, you learn to know the sounds of vehicles and who owns them, so on and so forth. But I heard this vehicle coming hell-bent for leather. I said, and I'm thinking to myself, this sounds like Marty Paddock's truck. And I used my brother Paul's good buddy. And they hunted and fished together, camped together, so on and so forth. And I'll be darned if it wasn't Marty Paddock, and they more or less knew where I operated radar. And he was going at a pretty good clip, and he comes slamming on his binders and pulled in next to me and said they had just seen a monster out on Abair Road. I said, come on, guys, what's going on? And these guys were really, really wound up. I mean, there was no grins, no smiles, no giggles, no nothing. And I'm starting to, think, these guys are serious. Are you guys smoking a little wacky tobacco and having a couple brewskis or something or what? No, he says, and they're going on. And he says, you got to get out there. You got to get out there. You got to see what we saw. So I said, I can't leave the village. If I were in pursuit or covering something for the sheriffs or the troopers, because they couldn't cover it, then I can leave. But anyway, my dad, who was a sergeant in the PD, had just got done with work. He'd been home roughly 20 minutes or so. And it was just before midnight, I believe, when Paul and Marty come in. So I called my dad. I said, and he was my sergeant also. And I said, what am I supposed to do? I can't leave the village. He said, well, call the state police and the sheriffs and send them out there and tell them I'll meet them out there, because like where I live right now, we're only 2.5, 3 miles from that place. So that night they not all at the same exact time, but every man that was there were 2 Washington County sheriffs, 2 New York State troopers, my brother Paul, Marty Paddock, Bart Kinney, and one other guy, all saw the same thing, not exactly at the same time, but everybody saw what Paul and Marty had seen originally. And what they thought it was possibly a woman being molested, raped, the scream they heard, and so on and so forth. That's when they came in to see me. Well, anyway, the next night I was off duty. It would have been a Tuesday night. I had Tuesdays off only. And the state trooper that was with me that night, he was in his own patrol car. He was on duty as a New York State trooper. And you would have to know the lay of the land. But you take a hill and put the letter S on it, on Abair Road, and he was in a field. We were roughly, I would say, 1,500 feet apart or so. And he was on the top, maybe 100 feet or so off the road in a field that had been mowed by the farmers, and the grass was green, and it was maybe 6-8 inches tall. And in front of him is a hedgerow that comes from the Pontley River. North of him, it's real thick woods, so on and so forth, and old abandoned farmland, so on and so forth. Now you get down to the bottom of the S and come up on top of the crest of a hill, and that's where there was a roadway that went out to this. It's a good-sized meadow. It's quite large. That's where I was parked, and I drove off the road. I was out there 250, 300 yards out off the road. Now, the field I was in had not been cut by the farmers that year. It was, put it this way, the grass was up to the top of the level of my Monte Carlo, and it was up to my hips. The top of my belt line is where the grass was. So anyway, I got situated in there, took my dome light out of the roof of my car so I could have my door open and not have any light of any kind. And I went out as somewhat as a skeptic, but I had already talked to my dad and 2 of the state troopers, one of the sheriffs, my brothers, about what they had saw, and there was no reason for me to disbelieve, especially my dad. No reason whatsoever for me to disbelieve them, but I still went out as a skeptic. And as we're sitting out there, we found a channel on the CB radio where there wasn't a lot of people talking and stuff, and we're jabbering back and forth, and off in the distance on this hedgerow that's between the trooper and myself, because you got to realize there's a meadow on both sides of this hedgerow. You might as well say it starts out at, say, 700 feet wide and ends up maybe 20 feet wide when it gets to the road. And we started hearing, I think it was 3 to maybe 4 times, 3 times anyway, you could hear what sounded like small trees being broken, say the size of a tennis ball or maybe a baseball. That it wasn't dead wood breaking. It sounded like live wood being broken, or limbs, whatever the case may be. We heard it once, and Jim says to me, he said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "Hear what?" Because I was still sitting in my car. I said, "No." I said, "Well, I'll get out of the car and see if I can hear it." As he was sitting in his car with both his windows down. And maybe 10, 15 minutes went by, and we heard it again. He said, "Did you hear it that time?" I said, "Yeah, I did hear it that time." I said, "Something's breaking." You knew something was coming towards us, between us, but towards us. And the last time we heard it, that was it. And then the next thing I hear was the state trooper, "Brian, what the hell is it? What the hell is, Jesus Christ, what the hell? I'm getting the hell out of here." And that's exactly what he did. He come out of that field, he blew by me, he's gone. I'm out there by myself. So I said, "Well, maybe this guy's playing a trick on me, trying to scare the jeebers out of me, so on and so forth." And I heard one more big crash, and it was pretty damn close to the road. It sounded like a tree limb or a tree being snapped over. So a few minutes went by, and I started, like I said, you got to realize now I'm on a hill. And from the crest of that hill to the bottom, where there's a little tiny place where the only time the water runs through is when there's heavy rain or the snow melt. A few cattails here and there. And way I'm using my spotlight from time to time, especially when I heard that last crash, I know there's something over there, but I can't see nothing. And I started hearing this, the way I describe it, as a person wearing corduroy pants and their thighs rubbing together. It was a whooshing noise. It would start and stop, start and stop. And by then, now my blood pressure is starting to get a little crazy, and my hair standing up on the back of my head. I know there's something there, and I can't see it. What the hell's going on? So it probably took, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes for this thing to come out of the bottom of the hedgerow to me. And I didn't realize till about the first, well, it was actually, I think, when Seth Breedlove did the film, the documentary, that when I was shining my spotlight at hedgerow, I was shining from the top of the hill towards the hedgerow. Anything underneath that beam I would not have seen. And that's when I heard the cattails. I knew the sound of cattails because something we used to do when we were kids, go down and break the little thing that grows on top and smoke them like cigars. And I knew the sound of breaking cattails. It's just something that stuck in my mind. And I heard that, and that's when I started shining down there, and I still don't see anything. And I heard the whooshing noise one more time, and just something told me, turn your light on now. And I turned my spotlight on, and right off the corner of the passenger side of my car, at roughly 30 to 35 feet, no farther, this creature that stood 7.5 to 8 foot tall, covered with a dark red, almost black hair. And always said, because I can remember, the eyes were round, about the size of mayonnaise jar covers, and they were quite far apart. And this thing, when I hit it with the light, it brought its hands up, not paws, or there were no claws or nothing like that. The hands were black, dark, very dark color. They weren't light enough like ours. And it let out such a deep, guttural, not a scream, but it'd be a combination of a growl and a scream, but it was so horrendously loud, let alone I could feel like me blowing a tube in your face at point blank. That's what I could feel in my chest, because I'm behind my door. I can feel that in my chest and my face. And at that instant is when just everything just went bonkers. I mean, every possible emotion your body can produce was instantaneous. And they say your life flashes before your eyes, or, before your eyes. Believe you me, it did. I remembered so many things in that split second that, I mean, my younger years playing with trucks in the dirt pile, running around with fake antlers, and having my brother shoot at us with these rubber band guns. We had all kinds of crazy stuff. It was all boom, 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 boom. But this thing, at the same time when it did that, the growl seemed very, very, very aggressive. It would take 3 men that don't smoke or anything to get the volume, let alone the longevity of that one, whether you want to call it a howl, a screech, growl, whatever. And I do remember something about the lips, where they'd be big and black or what. I do not remember a neck. The head was very, very close to our shape. It wasn't a cone head, but there might have been a dome there. And the head was huge. The body was huge. It was massive. And I don't know who believes or doesn't believe in telepathy. I do. A lot of people call it deja vu, but I call it telepathy. I got this, and I got the hammer pulled back on the gun. I'm standing behind my door. The spotlight's, I'm shaking like a leaf. And did I think about shooting? Yes. Did I want to shoot? No, because in my mind, something told me it's not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. That's what I had in my mind. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to hurt you. That's when it turned to its left. I noticed the hair on its right arm hanging down just like on an orangutan. And I'm back away from the car a little bit further because the thing's leaving. It's going down the hill towards that cattail area. And I could see the muscles actually functioning in the buttocks area, in the legs, in the back, in the arms. I can see the muscle. The hair on the back rolled inward from it rolled inward, and that didn't hang down. And you could see debris like clay. There were leaves in there. There were twigs. And that area down there is 99.9% clay, no matter where you go. Whether this thing was laying someplace and this stuff got, embedded in the hair or what, I don't know. But you could see that stuff. And this thing, when it was walking, it was 7.5 to 8 foot steps. And it was a fast gait. It wasn't not running, a fast gait. It never looked back until it got to the very corner of the hedgerow and the fence that comes across the field the opposite way. It turned around because I got the spotlight on it all the freaking way. It might have took it 3 minutes to cover 1,800 feet. And It turned around, looked back at me, and let out 3 more of those same howls, or grunts, whatever you want to call them. And that's when I sort of like got relaxed. I got the feeling, just leave us to hell alone. So it goes into the woods. It's gone. So I'm just sitting there, and I sat in my car, closed the door, rolled the windows 3/4 of the way up, locked the doors, and I sat there for a good half hour, 45 minutes, just collecting my thoughts, trying to get my mind wrapped around what the hell just happened. What did I just see? I know it's not nothing I've ever seen. I've seen bears. It was no way, shape, or form a bear of any kind. It was more human-like than anything I've ever seen, outside of another human. But it's just something that don't belong here. I did not know that much about Bigfoot, Sasquatches, or whatever else you want to call. I've heard of this and heard of that. But when I saw what I saw, I was right then and there. I said, I don't know where this thing's from, where it's going to, or what its purpose is. And all this stuff is going through my head while I'm sitting there. So after roughly 45 minutes, I head back into the village of Whitehall. And there was a spot there where us police officers used to hang out. And I walked in, and I walked in the front, and I could see the trooper car was down back. And I knew who was on duty, the guy that was with me. She says to me, Brian, what the hell's the matter with Jim tonight? He says, why? What do you mean? Says he's out there, he's slobbering coffee all over the place. He's staring off into space, and he's shaking like a leaf. I said, it's just something that happened a little while back. And I said, I'll go talk to him. So he's sitting at the table where we normally stay out in the dining room where they close it at night, and he's shaking like a leaf. He looked up at me, put his head right back down. There's coffee all over the table that he'd slobbered. You got to realize this guy was probably 5'10", 5'11", probably around 240, 250 pounds, like a little Brahma bull. And I looked at him, I said, Jim. And he looked up and said, what'd you see? He just shook his head, and he said, I didn't see nothing. I said, what? I said, Jim, what the hell did you see? I didn't see nothing. He put his head right back down. That was it. He never spoke to me again after that fact about anything to do with Abair Road or anything. And I said, well, he is full of shit. Period. He's full of shit. So I logged everything that had transpired.
Brian,
go ahead.
We're almost coming up on the break, sir. And thank you so much for relaying that story to us. And the reason I didn't want to interrupt you, I usually jump in and I ask questions. And it also goes along with the credibility factor in this case as well. It's the fact that after all of these years, you are still able to recall this, and it's almost as if you're reliving it when you're telling it. And that's all due to the fact that you're a trained observer. You know how to remember details, and that's what adds to the credibility of this. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Gosselin Mike Suppa will be here after the break. Bill Bean is here as well. We will be right back. Oh, welcome back, everyone. What a show this is shaping up to be. And we have got multiple guests with us here tonight. We've got my good friend here, Bill Bean. I'll be coming to Bill in just a moment. But not only that, we've also got Brian Gosselin, who was sharing his first-hand account of the night that he witnessed a Bigfoot back in August of 1976 in Whitehall, New York. And joining us during the break is somebody called Mike Suppa. Now, we'll be coming to Mike momentarily, and he too is a former police officer and was motorcycle protection for the likes of Daddy Bush, Bush Jr., Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, you name it, Mike's done it, and he is a wicked musician as well. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from Mike because he's got a lot to add to this as well. But Bill, let me come to you first because I can't thank you enough for bringing all of these people together. And this is something that we've touched on before, Bill. You know, this fact that there are these entities out there, be they Bigfoot, be they other types of creature, human, we don't know what they are. And before I go back to Brian, Bill, that was one thing I wrote down there. You know, it was more human than animal. We had human-looking hands as well. And to me, it ties in with everything. We've heard about this before. It doesn't seem to be anything that is in any of the encyclopedias anywhere. This is an unknown species, and in fact, we don't know where or when or which dimension this comes from.
Well, Kev, again, thank you for having this show. Thank you for having me back on. And I knew this was going to be a fantastic show, and I think it's very interesting and thought-provoking, to say the least. And, just the way Brian has been relaying the story, number one, it comes off 100% credible and authentic to me. Again, as somebody that's had some of the most bizarre experiences that you could ever imagine, what he's saying rings true. And he said something that I would like to ask him about. He said something during the break, and I certainly have a question for him about that, about how this all ties in with the UFO phenomena and the paranormal supernatural phenomena. And as you know, Kev, we've talked about this many times before, and I talked about it in my book, Stranger Than Fiction, that all of this certainly is tied together. So I'll be very interested to hear Brian's answers when we ask this question. We'll go a little further in depth about, I'm quite certain, without even hearing what he said yet, that he's had other experiences.
Brian?
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Yeah, Bill was just talking there, and in the meantime, since that event happened, I know you've got a bit more to share with us, but this isn't a solitary event in that area, is it? It's not isolated. There's been more stuff in and around there, hasn't there?
Oh, yeah, there's been a lot of stuff, actually. We got, most people around this neck of the woods and part of the United States knows where Lake George is. That's where one of the hottest spots is, right here where I live. It's I don't know if you want to call it a channel, a migration route. Why? I don't know, because where is point A? Where does point A start? You go across the border. I can walk to the state of Vermont in 15 minutes from my house. I live right on the border. And we've got the Pontley River, which turns into East Bay, which turns into Lake Champlain. And a certain area back there, I could take you back there blindfolded and drop you off. If you weren't on the road, you'd think you were in the Amazon. That's how thick. It's miles and miles and miles of swamp, thick, heavy weed, vine, and all this kind of stuff. And for some reason, this is the area they like so much. There was Cliff Sparks sighting on the golf course in 75. Then this took place in 76. And I dare say probably 78, 79, we have this stuff all logged, my wife and I, in a ledger. People have come to us and seen a creature similar to what we saw, but they didn't want to talk about it because I, to this day, take all kinds of harassment, being poked fun of, and I just look at them. If you don't believe, don't bother me. If you'd have been there with me, you'd have pooped your knickers to start with. You'd have had to been there with me to see it, and you'd be right where I am right now, being made fun of the whole 9 yards. You see, and that's one of the reasons I kept my mouth shut for so long.
Yeah, Brian, this is one of the things that really appeals to me as well, because a lot of the time, let me just make this really clear and let me emphasize this. A lot of the time, people will have a book to go along with their story at the time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is wrong. They could be 100% factual. However, there's always that opportunity then for people, naysayers, skeptics, to say, well, there's a financial motivation here. And in your case, not only was there no financial motivation, but from a career point of view, and I'll get Mike to come in after this to speak to this as well, but from the outside looking in, Brian, I would imagine this would be almost akin to career suicide, because like your friend blatantly went into denial mode, I would imagine that would be the typical response from somebody in your kind of position. So I want to ask you, what did your colleagues say at the time? Did you tell them at the time what had happened? What was the response?
Oh, yeah.
What was the response from your bosses, stuff like that?
Well, our chief at the time, he didn't, be honest with you, he didn't say that much. Now, I've got to touch base here and you'll understand better.
Yeah, no problem.
I had logged all this stuff in the ledger. the night of the initial call when I was on duty, let alone what transpired the next night. That police blotter is completely gone. Now, there's old arrest tickets, the whole 9 yards, which is public information. You can go to the police department and say, if you're applying for a job, but that book's gone. Nobody seems to know where that book is. Well, somebody's got it, because you're talking a book that was roughly 4 inches thick and probably 18 by 12. But anyway, that same troop, now I'm going to tell you, I just found this out, and this is a God's honest truth. I just found this out this year in the end of January. Now, that same state trooper that was with me that night, his partner, his first name is Don. He's a real good friend of mine. I know him and his wife both. And, of course, Don's retired. He's a local guy here. And his wife was standing at the cash register one morning when I was over having coffee before I went to work, and says, Joan says, Donnie, tell Brian what you told me. He looked at me. Joan looked at him again and said, tell him what you told me. So Don says, come on over here. He's a small guy. Don is a small guy, hell of a nice guy. He says, the night that stuff all happened, he said he wasn't working. Don wasn't working. So the next night he had to work with the same state trooper that was out there with me the night before. And he said, I got to the barracks, which used to be just barely south of Whitehall on Route 4. And he said, Jim comes walking in. He said, I've never seen that man get out of his clothes and get into uniform so fast. He said, and Don said, I looked at him and said, are you as excited as me? He said, about what? He said, we're going out to Abair Road. And that's when Don said, Jim lost. He said, there's no way in hell I'm going anywhere out near Abair Road. I'm not going anywhere near Abair Road. I want nothing to do with it. And he said, we're riding together. He said, like hell we are. He said, there's 2 cars out there. There's a radio in both of them. I'll be in one car. You want to go Abair Road, you go. I want no part of it. And that's just the way it ended right there. So then our dispatcher for that night of the Abair Road incident and the next night right to Saturday night, he told me the beginning of February, he says, Brian, remember when Jim told you he didn't see nothing? I go, yeah. I said, I never even talked to Jim ever. I've never talked to that man after that. He never looked me up or anything. No, we'd be gone. And Fred said, well, he come in the next night on duty. That's the night I just told you about, because Donnie's gone in one car and he's gone in the other. And he said, I do not want to go anywhere near Abair Road. He said, I saw exactly what Brian was talking about. Now, he admitted to my dispatcher. He admitted to his partner. Why the hell didn't he admit it to me? And that has irked me from day one. That has irked me from day one.
That is very strange indeed. Now,
yes, it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to bring in our other special guest tonight, Bill. It's a full house here tonight, Bill. Your friend Mike, do you want to kind of give him a little introduction before we speak to him here?
Yeah, he's an international recording star. He's played with some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry, and great friend, great guitarist, great guy. And I really appreciate him making this connection, because Mike is the one that came to me and said that he met Brian Gosselin, and it was all by chance. This was not by design. And so he had this chance meeting. And so, again, this is what God does. God brings people into our lives for a reason, and he creates situations and scenarios for a reason. So there's no such thing as a coincidence or anything like that, because everything means something. So when Mike messaged me and he told me that, he met this guy, Brian Gosselin, and the guy's so legit and so credible, amazing story. Well, I started to do a little research on Brian and his story. And then I said to Mike, I said, at the time I'm writing this book, Stranger Than Fiction, I said, I wonder if Brian would want to be a part of this book. And so that's how it all came about. But I wanted to make sure that Mike had a voice in the book as well, because it was Mike who made the connection. So God worked through him to make that connection. And so I couldn't be more pleased than to have, you, Kev, Mike, and Brian in the book. So it's a win-win, and I really thank all of you for being a part of it. So Mike, go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, Mike, I must admit,
Hello guys, how are you?
I'm fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to speaking to you, because we've obviously had a couple of back and forths on Facebook, and I remembered
Yes, sir,
reading.
yeah.
I remember reading chapter 6 the first time when the book arrived and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I was actually, for
Listen, I'm a
once.
big fan of your show too. I listen quite frequently to the show. It's so interesting.
See, we're like mutual appreciation.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
It's a mutual appreciation society. It really is, because I like your writing, and I like in the book how you kind of bring in the scientific as well. But if I take you back, and if you just briefly tell the audience, I mean, how did you first become interested in this whole topic of the Bigfoot? And then, of course,
I was interested in Bigfoot from when I was a child. I mean, the first movie came out, Boggy Creek, I think it was, The Legend of Boggy Creek.
Yep.
And you're a young kid. Yeah, you're familiar with that. And how are you, Brian?
I'm good, and you?
Boggy Creek is great, thanks. Boggy Creek was, as a young kid, is very impressionable, and I always had this thing for Bigfoot, and I just followed stories, and I came across Brian's story one day, and I saw it on YouTube or something, and I was like, wow. I didn't know at first he was a cop because I caught it like mid-swing, but then I found out he was a cop. I was like, wow, this is one of the most incredible stories of Bigfoot that I've ever even heard about. And just from that point on, I have a former background in law enforcement. I was 20 years police officer in New York. And, they send you to all these training schools and different types of specialization units and everything. But one of the specialization units required that I go for interview and interrogation, lie detection, and, stuff like that. And, it teaches you how to read people. I mean, if you're a cop, you know how to read people anyway, but this kind of goes a little more in depth. You can tell if somebody's BSing you, if they're not telling the truth, if they're deceptive or whatever. And there's certain things to look for. And, I just met Brian by complete chance. I took a ride up there with a friend of mine who's a member of the Bigfoot Research Organization in New Jersey, Larry Rippin. And he was investigating. He wanted to see, there was a sighting the week that we went up there. I guess the week before, there was some kind of sighting on one of the highways up there, which I won't even go into. But we were driving down the road, and Larry, as observant as he is, spotted Brian, on the side of the road. Just by chance, we're driving by. I didn't even know what he was talking about, and we stopped. I waited in the car, and then when he made a positive identification of Brian, we went across the street. Brian called us over. We introduced ourselves, and we hit it right off. And I heard Brian's story, and I was absolutely floored. So meeting Brian for me was the 100% level for me to be convinced that there are Bigfoots. I mean, yeah, there's the Patterson film. They have it documented on film. Yeah, okay. There's other stories. Speaking to Brian, and I didn't go up to Brian and read him. It's just something I do. If I talk to my mother, it's just, you're trained in it. You just look for things, to keep sharp.
Exactly.
And after speaking with Brian, I was 100% convinced that he was 100% truthful.
You see, that
no doubt in my mind. And
that really means a lot to me. And I'll share with all of you here just now. I've been very much like you, Mike, because I've looked into Bigfoot and I've loved stories of Bigfoot, the Yowie, the Yeti, ever since I was a little guy. And then I started doing the show, and I would do, from time to time, we would talk about the Bigfoot. And it got frustrating after a while, because as much as I believed that there was something out there, it was really hard to come across anything conclusive. And Bill will tell you, I'm a scientific kind of guy, so I like to have some kind of smoking gun evidence. Now, although this isn't a kind of smoking gun, like you said in your chapter in the book, and like we've been saying all along tonight, the credibility of a witness like this, along with your supporting evidence, Mike, that chance conversation where you were able to deploy what you had learnt in the interrogation field. And importantly, you didn't tell Brian beforehand that you had these kind of superpowers. And I'm kind of having a laugh and a joke with the superpowers, but everybody has tells, but not everybody knows how to pick up on them. So this really did. I mean, looking into this today, it's not that I'd kind of gone all skeptical, but this really invigorated my interest in the entire topic, because I don't say this lightly, Mike. I think this really could be the most credible Bigfoot sighting ever.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. I speaking to Brian, and I wasn't reading Brian, but you just, when someone's talking to you and you're hearing a story of this magnitude, and and I knew the story prior, and I was at Abair Road prior because I wanted to familiarize myself with the area. You see it on YouTube or something, and it looks kind of small, and then you get there and you're like, wow, this place is huge. The area where he saw it, I was there, and it's. But speaking to Brian, he was just so factual, and I even try to throw a couple left jabs in there to see if he would go, and he wouldn't. He was steadfast on his story, and there was nothing deceptive about any body language, any tonalities in his voice. He was impeccable. So I know for a fact, by not even being there, that Brian is 100% telling the truth, and there's nothing in my mind that would ever change that. I mean, people take polygraph tests. Yeah, sure. An honest person can fail a polygraph test. Those can sway whichever way they want them to sway at times too. But as far as this story, I'm 100% convinced there's a Bigfoot, and it's because of Brian Gosselin.
Well, Brian, on you go, Brian.
In that sense of the word, when you say that, they've made it a lot of these programs like Brian Gosselin sighting. Well, they seem to forget. There were 2 New York State troopers. There were 2 Washington County sheriffs. My father was a sergeant, and 3 other witnesses there, too. And they've made it, that's why we got so disgusted when we watched Animal Planet's cartoon being made. And Animal Planet did 2 cartoons, you might as well say, as far as I'm concerned. And they were jokes. They were just running jokes and gags, and all we did was laugh. And my wife sat there and said, Brian, it's about time we wrote the book about your story. And it goes full circle, back from my childhood, things that happened in between then to now, in the whole 9 yards. But what really irks me to an extent is that how can anyone tape an interview, take that same exact interview, word for word, and change 90% of the word, and you swear to God, like I said, that's why we wrote the book, because half these things, I don't even believe I was there. I don't think I was involved in it. And some of these kids, they were children at the time. Now they're the go-to guy. They are the professionals. And all they did was read books, get stuff from this professor, that professor. Now they're the knock-down, drag-out guy to go to. So, it just irked me. That's why we wrote the book. And I've had phone calls from all over this country thanking me, and I don't have half the training that Mr. Suppa has or anybody else. We were all 99% OJT. I read books. And I worked with troopers and sheriffs, and they taught me a lot along the line. This is back in the 70s, and being in a small, what they called hick town. But there was another sighting 10 years after mine, and he was a police officer on the same police department. He told me point blank to my face, I thought you were crazy for all these years, till me and my partner saw what we saw. And I dare say, in the last 5 years, I've had 3 New York State troopers come to my house and tell me what they had seen. 2 judges, a forest ranger.
Wow.
And it's every one of these sightings were within an 1/8 of a mile of the first. Not my sighting. Another place just barely north of Whitehall.
Now, Brian, did you say you're near Lake Champlain?
Oh yeah, Lake Champlain starts in Whitehall.
Is that not like? Is there not like supposed to be some kind of lake monster?
Yeah.
I knew you were going there.
Yeah, I only bring that up, right? And it sounds really kind of bizarre and left field to bring something like that up. But where I come from is right beside Loch Ness. And we obviously, everyone's heard of the Loch Ness Monster. And I've done from time to time shows where this this kind of lake monster comes up in the US. Right. And I'll come to you here, Bill, because I think there could be a connection. A loose connection. Nothing I can prove. However, me and you in particular, we often talk about portals, Bill.
Yeah.
And portals can be doorways to the supernatural. Now, when it comes to lake monsters, when it comes to cryptids, and something like we're talking about here tonight, this creature, I can't even call it a creature because it was more human than creature. This thing, the Bigfoot that Brian and so many others seen, you could tie that into some kind of dimensional portal.
You sure can biblically, because the Bigfoot Sasquatch creatures are mentioned in many scriptures in the Bible as hairy satyrs, the lion men of Moab, and several other mentions of them. And then the lake monsters, I'm convinced they are mentioned in the Bible as well as the Leviathan. So these are the sea monsters. And so this all is very much tied together. And I tell you, Kev, I really want to ask Brian this question. Brian, have you, prior to or since, had experiences with the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, things of that nature? What had taken place? I mean, does this go back to childhood? Can you share some of these things with us?
I could tell you some of the stuff that I've known, that I know, let alone something we just saw last night. But people are going to say the guy's crazy. But I'll tell you,
not
anyway,
you're not crazy.
No.
Just in the last 3 weeks, the first UFO, we see UFOs. I'm in a beautiful area for UFOs. Anybody that lives in the Northeast is in a beautiful spot for UFOs.
Yeah, you're right.
They are. They said the book that I had. You think I can remember the name? I let somebody borrow it. They talked about when the whole mass broke up, and this chunk of land went that way, and this chunk of land went that way. That I would say New Hampshire, northern Connecticut, up in there was a portal at one time, supposedly. This was all in this book. But anyway, let's go to Champ first. The one lady that was camping at the state campground outside of Virgins, Vermont. It's a state campground. She had this thing on video, and when you look at that, you can't tell me that's not. You can't tell me it's a floating stump. Right? They have taken this film and done to this film that this woman's gotten. It's better than the Patterson film. They can't break it down and disprove what she has. She said this thing was swimming and came right up out of the water, and it's I got to say roughly it's a good sized net, lot bigger than a basketball, and it's roughly, I would say, 200 yards from shore in Lake Champlain. And they've done to her what they did to the Patterson file. They've tried to tear this thing apart in any which way or form they can to disprove what she's got on that film. Well, they can't. There's all kinds of scientific studies and the whole night. They can't disprove that tape. And she's not the only one that's seen this stuff, But,
I believe it.
People, the people's mind, near 2019, their minds are so closed. And there's so many programs on TV now just about UFOs alone. And you were talking about dimensions and portals. That's all common TV knowledge now. What you were talking about earlier, NASA's talking about it. Ancient Alien Program is talking about it. And these two new programs that are on now, the new one starting this month on the History Channel, Contact, because they ran 5 programs last month about. It showed our F-16s and F-14s chasing these things. They chase more of these, what they call Tic Tacs.
Yeah.
These spacecraft, over 100 of them on radar, and they all disappear into the ocean. And they've got this stuff on camera. Why aren't they saying to you that they're a bunch of liars and that they're making this up? It's just so much out there that people just do not understand. And in the last year to 2 years, how many so-called extinct animals, 4-legged animals, bugs, birds that they've rediscovered?
Yeah.
And they're supposedly extinct.
And here's the way I look at it, Brian. This is the way I look at it. Don't ever worry about trying to force your truth in a sense. Yeah, because the truth is the truth, and there's no substitute for it. So the substitute for the truth is a lie, and to the skeptic, you will never have enough to provide that will sway them. To the believer, no truth is necessary. So I believe you 100%. And I know there's a lot of people that do. And I went through similar things like you in the beginning when I started sharing my story and experiences.
We'll be back after the break. Don't go anywhere, folks. Hour number 2 on today's brilliant Bigfoot special right here on the Kev Baker Show on the number 1 network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. I've been on my best behaviour tonight because we got 2 ex-cops in the house, so I'm behaving big time. No handcuffs out just yet, But we have got Brian Gosselin, who has taken the time to share with us the most amazing story of what he witnessed back in August of 1976. And that, of course, was a Bigfoot. And the reason I'm so excited, Bill's so excited, and we're calling this, in our opinion, the most credible Bigfoot sighting that I've come across to date, is because Brian isn't just your ordinary witness. He was a law enforcement officer. And it was witnessed not by one law enforcement officer, but multiple law enforcement officers and members of the public. It's not the only thing that's happened in that area either. And we'll be catching up with Brian on a UFO flap. Lots more to come from there. We're going to be going to Mike next, though, because he's got that science eye like I do. Before I go there, Bill, I mean, you told me this was going to be a good show. You really did undercook it. This has been amazing so far. And you were sharing with me during the break. I was asking you, you know, do you do much work in and around the same area that Brian's coming from here? Again, kind of relating to this portal, perhaps, this energetic area. So you were telling me that you have been there, right?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, I have a lot of clients. I've been in not in Whitehall, but I have been near there. I've been to clients in Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, all through there, and then into Mike's area, into upstate New York. And I think Brian was referring to, he referred a little bit about that. I believe it's called the Bridgewater or Bridgeport Triangle or something up there. And it is this area where these portals are. And I believe that there's portals all over the world, but, you know, since CERN has come along and the D-Wave computers and things that could open, which I'm firmly convinced that they do open these portals. So portals were already there, but now with the technological capabilities of such devices, I think many more portals are now opening, and I think that's why so many people are seeing and experiencing the supernatural and the paranormal and UFOs and the Bigfoot Sasquatch. And furthermore, Kev, I am firmly convinced, without truly knowing the answer, because I've never sat down with a Bigfoot creature. I've had experiences with them, but I've never sat down and talked to one. But I'm convinced that they are the offspring of the offspring. So the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, who came down from heaven and took human women, producing a hybrid offspring of giants called the Nephilim. I believe that the Nephilim went into the forest and had unnatural sexual relations with the beast of the field, creating this offspring of the offspring, whether they look like apes, bears, or in some cases, like Brian, like his experience, was more human. And so I believe that these creatures are part angel, which makes them supernatural, but they're also part human and part ape, bear, or whatever else that, you know, that took place to where the act took place with whatever animal that was. But I truly believe that that's what these creatures are. And I've also studied quite a bit that they follow along in like Native American types of ways with the teepees, you know, with the sticks and all that kind of stuff. So it really is fascinating. And whatever the answer is to it, it's very real. And again, I'm with you 100% in agreement with you, Kev, and Mike as well, that Brian's story is just the most credible, up close encounter that I have ever heard of.
Absolutely. And Mike, let me come back to you because, again, we both wrote a chapter in the book, Stranger Than Fiction, showing it off there to the audience. And I really loved your chapter. And one reason I got so engrossed in it was the fact that, like myself, you kind of approach things and you like to look for a scientific kind of explanation as well. And you were quoting professors in the chapter. And you also had come up with a kind of idea due to the fact that Brian had heard this beast. You had some idea about how to basically work out its lung capacity, right? Do you want to kind of tell us about your ideas about how you were going to further verify and add to this story?
Well, what I was thinking about after Brian told me the story, because I said to Brian, Brian, I said, you were 30 feet away from it, and he said it screams so loud, and I was like, well, how can you measure it? He goes, the best thing I can tell you is if somebody put a tuba up against your ear and blew in it, and and that's loud. Everybody knows the sound of a tuba. So I was thinking, to go up that exact day, that time of the year, while the leaves are still there, there's no snow on the ground, whether it's rain or not rain, to muffle sound. But I wanted to go up there with some electronic equipment and bring Brian up there and just grab levels of what he can remember from his recollection, from 76. Was it 76?
Yep.
76, yes, it was.
Brian said? Yeah. So, from 76, his recollection of how loud the volume would be, because I wanted to measure it in decibels and then measure it as far as he can remember how long it sustained the yell. But I figured if we did that, we would be able to tell, at least the capacity of a lung size or something like that. And it was just an idea I had. I threw it, to a couple of professors. I haven't heard back from them yet. But
and of course, you work with music.
I'm
so
a person that deals with facts.
Yeah, you work with music. You're a very talented musician. I was looking at some of the bands you had jammed with and played with today. So when it comes to sound and sound waves and the science of sound, I mean, you couldn't ask for somebody better, really, than yourself to be looking at this, Mike.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, I have a knowledge of sound and everything else. Am I that apt where I can go there and set up the equipment and do everything? No, I'd have to bring somebody that really knows what they're doing. Because honestly, I have a guitar tech that sets up my stuff, and I just go and play and leave. But, talking to Brian, it was just the whole situation. For me, it was the single most heightening experience, I got to say, since I've been reading about Bigfoot since I was a kid. Because I know that he's telling 100% fact. He knows what he saw. There's no wavering. He's not a mental case. He's not a drunk. He's not this. He's a very credible witness. Probably the most credible witness I've ever seen or read about in any movie or book. And I look at all these YouTube things and, people try and make up the stories, and this is not a story. This is what happened. And nobody can tell me different, and I'll take that to the grave.
No,
that's what I'm trying to tell people. It's the facts. It's not a made-up story.
Exactly.
Right,
this is exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I think that, the fact that yourself and others decided to make that move, Brian, because I can imagine as well, if I was witness to something, and there I was sitting watching it being retold and butchered and changed to the point where I didn't even realize if I was in that event anymore. The fact that does make you angry to the point where you did write the book eventually, again, for me, that only adds to the whole entire story. And Mike, let me come back to you, because again, I was laughing to myself today because I remember this, you were talking about when you were first interested in Bigfoot. It was changed days, right? Because younger people just now, they're just used to finding things out on the internet, touch of a button. But you were talking about...
Yeah, we didn't have internet then.
You had to wait for newspaper reports, encyclopedias, stuff like that. And over the years, with your kind of investigative eye as well, I mean, what's your full take on what we're dealing with here from what you've researched yourself, what you've seen with Brian? What do you think we're dealing with when it comes to the Bigfoot?
My take, I mean, I had a couple different views of what I think, different opinions of what I think it might be. I mean, I don't know what it is, obviously. But, I thought, I watch UFO stuff on TV, and I read UFO books. Not as much as I used to, but I do. But I always thought it was a government experiment that went haywire and the thing escaped. And that was my view, because if you read some of the other things that are going on, a lot of times military will show up. There's another gentleman I know that does these programs about people missing in national parks and everything. He doesn't say what it is, but when you have military or the FBI coming in for somebody that's missing or something, or investigating a Bigfoot site, there's more to it than just, hey, that guy said he saw a Bigfoot. Okay. And you got to remember, in 76, when Brian saw it, who in their right mind is going to say, hey, I saw a Bigfoot? It's not like today where it's accepted. Back then, you saw a Bigfoot, they were ready for the nut house for you.
Exactly.
But you're talking to a police officer. You're talking to a guy that has high credibility factor in his favor. It's absolutely. Let me tell you, if you talk to Brian, I mean, you talk to him on the phone now, but if you see him in person, the way he describes what happened to him that day, there will be no doubt in anyone's mind. I bought the book that he had, and I said to him, I said, why did it take you 40 years to write a book? I would have wrote a book week 2. And he said, they just wanted to keep it, on the down low. He said, but when people started making up parts of his story that weren't there, he decided he was going to set the record straight. And I bought the book, Abair Road, The True Story. It was one of the greatest reads I ever had. I keep bugging him and his wife to write another one.
It's in the works.
I bought a copy of it as well.
Yeah,
I purchased a copy.
I read it twice. I read it 3 times. On the 4th time.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to get a copy of that. But Brian, let me come back to you now, because it's been kind of we got your story at the start, and I gave you the time to lay that out because I didn't want to interrupt you. But now I want to really come back to you and get into detail, because this is something we can take advantage of here. Not only are you one of the few people to be 30 foot away from one of these things, but you've got that trained eye. And I seen in Mike's take on this today, you had mentioned the kind of definition of the muscles on the legs. Talk to us about this creature. What are the fine details you remember? You've got the red eyes. You tell the audience. You tell me, man.
Like I said, about the big round eyes, I always compared them to the diameter of a mayonnaise jar cover, and the head was, I would say, 2.5 times the size of a normal human being. And everybody, one of the questions they asked me, and it was the simplest one to answer, was how could you guesstimate the height? I said, that's the simplest question of all. I was standing I'm 6'1", the grass was up to my hips, it was up to its knees. And it's in the same damn field I'm in. This thing was not hunched over, it was maybe a smidgen, but not hunched over like a guy with osteoporosis or anything like that. And like I said, really, really broad, thick, heavy shoulders, very muscular. It was a little bit thinner. I wouldn't say the thing was starving to death, but the shoulders were really super broad, really muscular. Like I said, when the thing was walking away, you could see, because for that time in the 70s, to have a 200,000 candle power spotlight, that's a pretty bright light. And at 35 feet, when it finally turned and started walking away, and I got the light right on, I'm watching. You can see the muscle structure working in the legs,
so Brian,
in the backs of the arms.
Brian, was it dark? What time of day was this when you were actually when you went?
This was after midnight.
Okay, yeah.
And I do not recall a moon being out, but it was so dead quiet, and there was humidity in the air. It was very, very. Now you got to realize, out in the country, in August especially, with the katydids and the crickets and all this stuff, there's so much, there was not even a sound. And that's why we could hear the limbs or the trees being snapped at such a distance, because it was dead silence. That's one of the strangest things. A lot of people older than I am, that have had experiences prior to ours, back when they were young adults, so on and so forth, that, of course, back then, if you talked about something like that, you ended up in a hotel with the bars on the windows. And they never spoke about it, but a lot of people in their 70s and 80s have come to me since then, telling me things they experienced right here in my neighborhood where I was brought up. And it put it this way, in one sense, this thing, not that it haunts me every day, but there's not one day since that incident that I don't relive that somehow. I got paranoid for a while. I didn't want to go hunting. I got to the point where I thought, be honest with you, I thought I was a little crazy myself, because I'm trying to put all this stuff together. Because as a kid growing up watching, I remember during Halloween, they come up with this movie with this gigantic robot that came from outer space and is going around doing all the nasty stuff and all. And we got to go out trick-or-treating. I didn't want to go trick-or-treating that night.
And
because it scared the bejeebers out of me,
I'm not surprised you were questioning yourself, because there's your friend, the one other person who could have corroborated your story. And with this thing standing so tall out of the grass, yet he's denying it all, I would have been questioning myself as well. And this is fascinating. Brian, this is the first time I've picked up on something like this, and I think it's key, because that silence you were talking about, the fact that the other insects in the area, the other kind of wildlife, they'd cleared out. And that's interesting because even before earthquakes, stuff like that, you hear of ants leaving the area. You hear of these animals that pick up on electromagnetic fields. They pick up on energies.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Frequencies
again,
and vibrations, yes.
Yeah, and it's almost as if the wildlife, everything there, they're aware of what's in the area. You started to pick up on it. And you said in your initial story that it was almost like a form of telepathy. Is that what almost put you at ease? Is that why you didn't decide to react like most people and pull the trigger?
Yes, that's there's so many bases I got to touch here as to why. Like I said, it was like something was talking in my ear. Put it this way, like something was talking in my ear saying, "I'm not going to hurt you." Why would I get that? And this thing, I was scared, frightened, but not like a kid seeing a boogeyman. You know what I'm saying? Your whole body, your just whole body. It felt like somebody was pouring hot honey over me, or I was going to spontaneously combust. There was so many feelings and stuff all instantly, bang.
And you see, Brian, with all of those feelings running through you, it's actually the most bizarre thought in the world then to enter your head, unless it was some form of communication, because why on earth, with all of that going on, all of your senses tingling, would you imagine or would you start thinking to yourself, it's okay, I'm not going to harm you here? It just doesn't seem right unless it's some form of communication, call it telepathy, something else that's very supernatural.
Again, you just took the words out of my mouth, Kev. That's where the supernatural comes in. So Brian mentions two things in this that, number one, what he said about everything getting dead still is absolutely correct. It rings true. I've had my own experiences where things would go dead still like that. So I know what he's saying. Secondly, with the telepathy, the thoughts that come into head, here he is, he's got the hammer back. He could have very easily squeezed that trigger out of sheer panic and could have emptied his gun, out of sheer terror and panic. But yet the supernatural comes in again to where he gets this thought in his head to where as if someone is communicating with him saying, I'm not going to harm you. So we see that the supernatural is very much tied to these creatures.
Well, and another thing, too, in that same sense is that when I first got it in the spotlight, the gun's pointed at it, the hammer's pulled back, I'm shaking like a leaf. I'm surprised the gun didn't go off by itself. But that's beside the point, is that I still had that thought in the back of my head. What if this is a human? Because I haven't seen muscle structure working or anything yet. What if this is a man in a monkey suit? What if this? What if that? What if that also played a part in it? Because I've done different shows like the Rutland Fair and stuff, and told the story. And one guy says to me, he says, "You mean to say a New York State trooper was scared and left?" I said, "He's a human being just like the rest of us." And he said, "Well, why the hell did you shoot it?" I said, "Number one, you think we're taught the first time you see something you don't understand, you shoot it and kill it?" Well, the guy got totally disgusted with me anyway, and he walked out. That was a good thing in one sense. But you don't just pull up a gun and shoot because you don't know what it is.
Right.
Number one, But I gotta throw this in here, guys, because this is the last report I had was in January of this year. I've got a track that's 18 and a half by 11 3/4. And I had a gentleman look at that who's into biology, said he figured it was a big male, and I guesstimated the weight around 550. He said, no, I'd go 650.
Wow.
This thing went through 2 inches of frozen snow, not ice now. It's when we were having to thaw. And it was right on the corner of his house, roughly from the footprint to the corner of his house, might have been 2.5 feet.
Was it one print, Brian? Was it one print?
Oh, no, there were 14 prints that I found. A heel here, toes there, and went around the back of his house, across his front yard, around his swimming pool. And I never got the cast until April of this year, April 14th of this year. And it's one of the best casts I've ever seen. We've got one good one out of the mountains up here in Thurman, That'd be just to the west of Lake George.
Now,
Not very
Brian,
far, right along the Hudson.
Brian,
right along the Hudson.
During the introduction, I have to get you to tell me the name of that mountain range, because I absolutely butchered the name of the mountain range that's in your area.
No, you didn't know the last time you mentioned it. It's the Adirondacks. It's ADIR Rondacks.
Got you.
RONDACKS. The Adirondacks. I mean, they run from the Canadian border clear down, and they're big.
And during one of the breaks as well, you were telling us about, was it a UFO flap that had been happening prior to what happened? Oh, yeah. Do you want to tell the audience about that?
Well, there was multiple police agencies, not just police agencies, not just the little town of Whitehall, the state police, the sheriffs, anybody, like I said, anybody that worked nights. I don't care what kind of job you did. If you look up in the sky, especially if you're out in the country. But I was working in a village. Of course, it's not well lit like a city. But there were things up there, and it's the troopers and us, we all be looking at the same thing. What the hell is it? Things zipping around the sky, coming to a dead stop. But this went on for roughly, I would say, 4 to 5 days, maybe 6. And then from that point on, for a good week to 8 days, it was dead silent. Then boom, this ordeal out on Abair Road. And I always tied one in with the other anyway. But how can you be tracking something? And I'm not talking snow. I understand snow, blowing snow, so on and so forth. But when you're right on a good trail, and you've got tracks, and you come to a clearing, and all of a sudden they're gone. Where are they going? Because everybody comes up to me just because of my sighting and say, well, where did they go? How come we haven't found the body? How come this? I said, maybe they eat their own. Maybe they bury their own. Maybe they get zapped up into the sky. I don't know. I had a sighting. I do not follow these guys around and write down what they do and what they don't do. It's a tough question for anybody that's had the experience I've had to answer questions people throw at you. You know what I'm saying?
Again, Brian, I believe that, again, without really knowing the answer, but I truly believe that the supernatural aspect of these creatures, once again, they have the ability and capability to make themselves invisible. So they can take a step or two or whatever, and then all of a sudden they can become invisible. And this is part of them being an angel. So this takes me right back to these creatures being part supernatural. And also, there are many reports of people having UFO sightings and seeing the Bigfoot creatures around, or even coming in or going out of UFOs at various times over the years.
Exactly.
So,
well, there's something else I want to tie in here, and I want to come back to you, Mike, if I may, because this involves another ex-police officer, and you had mentioned the missing people from the national parks. Now, the man that's really at the center of all of those investigations, love to get him on the show, is David Politis, and he does a documentary called Missing 411. And in your opinion...
he's amazing.
Yeah, in your opinion, Mike,
he is.
And we can only speculate here because even David himself wouldn't go as far as to say there's a connection, but do you think in some of these disappearances, I'm not going to blame the Bigfoot, but let's perhaps go to the portal aspect of it again. And that would explain these strange, random disappearances at times. That's my opinion. Mike, what do you think?
You know, I'm going to go back with it might be something that has to do. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the government. I mean, like Dave mentioned in one of his shows, there was a missing youth in a national park, and the Green Beret came in. Why would the Green Beret come in? I mean, you got all these units out there, all different municipalities. Why do you have the Green Beret? They don't come out for a typical missing person. I mean, if you're missing in New York City, the Green Beret aren't going to come in and look for you.
Well, this is funny because
so you have FBI's going to the scenes, and FBI's don't investigate missing kids unless there's a certain criteria and there's a certain age. But Dave Politis, he's amazing. He really has it down. He's really onto something. I've corresponded with Dave. He's very intelligent. He's another former cop, and he's not getting a lot of cooperation too. They're making it really difficult for him.
Really difficult.
It ties in with the government. Oh yeah, they're not giving him information.
Well, I find this really interesting.
Even with Freedom of Information Acts, they're rejecting his requests, or they're giving him astronomical figures. Okay, you want the report? It's 1.4 million. Where's he going to come up with that?
Absolutely, and it's quite interesting.
They have ways to hold everything back and prevent you from getting to the truth. But he's definitely onto something, and I'm a big fan of his. I
Yeah.
think he's also 100% credible.
He's really good. And when we come back after the break, we'll continue this. We've got one segment to go. But just recently, I was telling the audience on my live stream about the first human monkey hybrid that had been created in China. Now, if that's what they're telling us about in public, then what is going on in these dark projects, in these secret labs? Could that be what we're talking about? Join us after the break. We'll get into more of this with Brian Gosselin, Mike Suppa, and Bill Bean. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Final segment of what has been an absolutely breathtaking show tonight. And maybe it's just me, and I shouldn't really say this, but I'm sure the audience have picked up on this as well, because KBS, it's a journey, right? And there's highs and there's lows. But in recent weeks, recent months, we've really been hitting some very big, important stories from the world of politics, something I rarely talk about these days, right out to this stuff we're talking about tonight, the supernatural, and all of the stuff that I affectionately call the woo. And with this awakening, which is part of the apocalypse that is going on right now, more and more people are thirsting for this kind of information. They've maybe spent their lives totally poo-pooing and turning their nose up at talk of the supernatural and the paranormal because they themselves have never experienced it, be it ghosts, be it UFOs, be it Bigfoot, be it anything of that nature. But now, with the veil thinning, with CERN, with the D-Wave, and more things happening, and even governments responding by giving us so-called disclosure with the kind of stuff we were talking about earlier with the Tic Tac videos, more and more people are keen to know what's going on. And that's why when you have somebody like Brian Gosselin, an ex-police officer who has retold the events of August 1976, and an event that he was at the heart of back then, I think people are going to really sit up and pay attention. And it's not to dismiss any of the other Bigfoot accounts out there. Not at all. Everything must be taken by a case-by-case basis. And this case, well, these guys will tell you, you could take this to any court in the land because they are both former law enforcement officers, Brian Gosselin and Mike Suppa, and Bill Bean with me as well. So, Brian, let me come to you because the reason that you waited decades to write a book about this event in Whitehall, New York State, the reason you wrote that book is because the story had been butchered. It had been changed, it had been embellished, people almost taking it for their own to the point where you didn't recognize it anymore. So what I want to do is give you 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever you need in this last segment, to really emphasize some of the points that you want the listeners to take away for their consideration. And before you do that, if you could also let the audience know where on earth we can find this book, because if the audience are like me, they're going to be dying to read it, sir. So please, where can people find the book? And then I'll hand it over to you, Brian.
Very good, sir. Thank you. But the only place you're going to find it is on Amazon. It's for sale as far as being a computer, but we have it at 2 different localities in Whitehall, if you just happen to be up this way. They're both on Route 4. One of them is the Big Apple Diner, and the other one is you can't miss it. There's a great big, humongous Bigfoot statue outside the building right along Route 4 with a young one on its back. This guy did it all out of steel, and he's an artist in himself. I mean, to do this kind of stuff, he's truly an artist. He did a good job. But I just want people to realize, you know, what we're experiencing today, because there's one thing that sticks in my craw when I talk to my mom about this whole ordeal. Of course, my father and brother and everybody talked about it. Is my mom said, Brian, she said, she was born in the 30s. He said, we used to read comic books, and with Dick Tracy talking into his wristwatch and radios that didn't exist and all this stuff. She said, looked at me, said, Brian, been there, done that. She said, look at what you got today compared to what we had back when I was a child. And people with technology, it's just berserk. I mean, our technology is zoomed, and like I believe it's all from UFO stuff that we've got in our possession that how we come up with stuff overnight practically. But with the Bigfoot incident, it was real. There was no baloney. I wasn't the only one there. That night, myself and an on-duty state trooper the night before was other police officers. But we were more or less told to keep our mouths shut about it. I'd actually asked reporters to leave my house because I worked nighttime, and they'd be banging on my door at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30 after I got home. And I finally got to the point. And then coming from the kind of childhood we had, I come from a very large family. We were, you might as well say, poor. Well, yeah, it's just some poor person looking to blow up a balloon, so on and so forth. It's not true. You wouldn't say that to the troopers that were there, and so on and so forth. But they've made the whole ordeal so, like you said, so extravagant. It was how you write a story the way you think it should be, and you shouldn't have said that. This is what you should say. We wrote the book for the simple fact it's my words. It's my experience. It's my encounter. That book, you will. We have had no bad reviews on this book except for it was too short. That is it. And you are going to live my experience. And I tell you right now, I truly lived this experience a lot. It bothered me for a long time, mentally, physically. And now I take it with a grain of salt. But like I say, I swear there's not a day goes by I don't think about what I saw, what's going to happen next. Because that, to me, is the beginning of something that's coming in the future. These things are more prevalent than you think. I've seen 2 films I can't even mention that these people have got, and it puts the Patterson files to shame. I can't even mention a man's name. He's got it on video, didn't know it for, I think, 11 years, and his grandson said, "Well, Grandpa, what's that?" And you can see this thing. Now, we measured the stone wall. The stone wall was 7.5 feet tall. This thing, we're on the other side because we've got the exact location. I can't see over it. I'm only 6'1". This thing had just below the shoulders and head above this stone wall. And you see this thing come down out of a tree, walk the top of this stone wall, and get on this thing's back, and away it goes. And this is all on video. This is roughly 2.5 minutes on video. We tried our damnedest to get the guy. We wanted to get this a copy made through lawyers. No, guy said, nope, don't want them bothered. We know they're there. We don't want them bothered. And that's right here in a straight line from where I live, roughly 40 miles. And another thing a lot of people don't realize that the Green Mountain Boys went down to Virginia to fight. The British up here at Fort Ticonderoga went to fight. Every one of these outfits have got these same creatures listed in their ledgers as the big hairy man, this thing, that thing. These things have been around for not hundreds, thousands of years. Yeah. There's etchings on walls. And I guess you might as well say, if I'm a bullshitter, that the Green Mountain Boys made it up, the British made it up, the Indians, all the Indians know about it. And another thing, when
and Brian, let me add to that as well. You've got people from all the other continents around the world. You've got Australia with the Yowie. You've got Asia with the Yeti. You've got the wild men that they call them here in the UK. I had a lady on one night talking about them. You've got the skunk ape. You've got the Sasquatch. You've got all these different names for it over in America. And I love what you said, Brian. I mean, I actually think these things may have been around even longer than we have, because like Bill's talking.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think we're talking thousands of years, Brian.
Right. Like I told you, the last cast I got, I didn't finish that. This guy, I can't mention his name for security reasons. He was a true blue knockdown, drag-out disbeliever in Bigfoot. And believe you me, he believes now. After what his grandson told him, the grandsons told him, playing in the snow, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, this guy works in a nuclear power place. He said, Brian, I've been all over the world. I've been to the UK. He said, I've been to Germany. He works high-tech security, and this guy's still into security. He's really, really up there. And he said, I could tell you things, I'd probably be shot tomorrow. But the point being, he said, by the end of this year, you're going to see things on programs that you're not going to believe. He said, I could tell you things you think would be impossible. But he said, I was in, I think it was Wyoming, at one of the nuclear places back during the Cold War. He said, I know what I saw. There was more than one of them. That's when they activated our nuclear missiles for 10 minutes. He said, I was there. There was nothing we could do about it. He said, these ships are over the base. And he said, we all looking at the same thing. And he said, for 10 minutes, everybody's holding their breath, thinking these missiles are going to go off. And then they deactivate them, and they're gone. They were gone that quick. Wow. And it's the same thing that happened in Russia. And even the Prime Minister himself of Canada, back in January on Ancient Aliens, come right out and he said, listen, he said, why did the United States covers all this stuff up? He said, the last UFO that crashed here, we gave it to the United States, said, you deal with it, we're tired of it. He said himself, now this on national television, he said, we know there's 7 different species so far that we know of.
Yeah, and that's
we'll deal with it the way we want.
Yeah, that's Paul Hellier. And just, yeah. I don't mean to sound like I'm correcting you, but just for the people out there that like to troll and pick on details, he was the ex-defense minister, which I think makes it even more appropriate and a job to talk about this, because everything's compartmentalized in governments and military, and I would expect it to be the defense minister who would be privy to that. You know, sometimes even presidents and prime ministers and leaders of countries, they may not have a need to know, and that sounds really silly, but when you know how the military works, and more importantly, when you get further up the chain, the more secret the stuff you're dealing with.
Exactly.
You know, loose tongues sink ships, and the less people you tell, the more chance you have of keeping this actually airtight. And it's really interesting how you said there, and of course I don't want you to put this witness or whoever it is in any jeopardy whatsoever, but the fact you were told that by the end of the year we're going to be seeing more information on UFOs, stuff like that, that's really interesting, Brian.
Well, I've just got this gut feeling. I've had this, I've been telling my wife, I'm not a true psychic. My wife is a psychic medium, and she's in dozens of books. And I get when I do an investigation with her, I get names, and it burns her rear end because she don't get the names. I get names of it's impossible for me to know. But this is only the way I see what's happening is that between Ancient Aliens, and they've upgraded that in the last month, and this other program, now the new one that's coming out this month called Contact, we are being prepared as a human race as to what's going to be here by the end of the year. And this guy that's way up in security, he said, I'm 99.5% sure by the end of this year, we people, he said, I already know enough. He said, you're going to be shocked at what you find out and what you see. All we can do is wait and see.
Yeah, that all ties in with the times we're living in, because myself and Bill, we often talk about how things are getting stranger than fiction. Again, the name of Bill's last book. And if these things are going to become more commonplace, be it Bigfoot, be it UFOs, be it aliens, then you would expect a program of preparing the masses. And it could be that that's exactly what we're seeing right now, Bill. And of course, in your line of work, you're on the front line of this. You're dealing with some of the darkest, most negative energies out there. But again, in some way, shape, or form, I think all of it's coming from the same place, brother.
I totally agree. I think this is part of a disclosure process because they can't cover it up anymore. There are too many people having experiences. There are, I can't tell you how many people that I've gone to and continue to go to that are having demonic problems, but they're also having a cavalcade of other experiences where it's UFO types of things, Bigfoot, whatever it may be. I mean, I've gone into the woods. Kev, you remember me saying, and Mike knows about this as well, I believe it was last November.
It was in Texas, wasn't it?
Well, that was one, but then another one was Gloverville, New York. Yep. That was up above Albany, and it was 15 degrees that night. It was a brisk wind. It was snowing, and I went into the woods because these people were being bothered by these Bigfoot creatures, and their animals were being frightened and all these types of, and they were having demonic problems as well. So it all ties in together, and this is why now the public is being shown on a regular basis all of these types of programs, and it is a preparation process. It is part of this mass awakening, if you will. And what's sad and unfortunate is, we talk about this all the time, Kev, is that a large amount of the populace is so asleep and they're so self-centered and it's all about them and they don't care and they don't want to know and all these types of things.
Exactly.
Well, that's all well and fine if you think you're going to bury your head in the sand and this is just going to pass over. If you want to believe that, go right ahead, but that's not the truth. The truth of the matter is that this is going to affect everyone, and this brings me right back to faith. It is essential to have a strong connection with God and strong faith because of the things that are coming and the things that are already here.
And let me just, full disclosure here, pardon the pun for the audience, because they might be sitting thinking, going, well, hang on a minute. Kev's kind of warned us about some of this alien stuff that we're seeing on TV, the To the Stars Academy, and all of the disclosure, as we've been calling it for so many years now. And although I've knocked some of the people involved in bringing this information forward, let's just step back and look at what's happening. We're being told all of this for a reason, and these things are going on. And whatever the motives are behind people giving us some parts of the story and other people coming and giving us other parts, and I'm talking about the more official stuff here, folks. Don't dare think I'm actually bringing in the blue chickens or anything into this. That's the ridiculous end of this story that makes people turn away from it. But I can definitely see that the release of this information, whatever we make of it, is for a purpose. They're not just doing it off the, for the sake of us. They're doing it for a reason. And I would definitely say there's a program being played out right now. And Mike, I'll come back to you now, sir, because this kind of factors in more with where you're coming from, this kind of government cover-up, be it Bigfoots, be it UFOs. Do you see this same kind of disclosure that's happening right now, be it real, be it fake? There definitely seems to be something going on in the fact that they're preparing us for something, Mike.
I believe everything that you guys are saying is correct, and I was always an advocate that, there's a lot of things in this world that go on that we have no idea about or any clue about. I don't believe we're the only form of life on Earth. I think there's other things here. I think there's other things from, you guys were talking portals earlier. I just started reading about the portals, and I watched a couple of interviews with people talking about it, and I found that fascinating because I never really looked at that aspect of it. I'm a guy with facts. I like to see stuff in front of me and deal with facts. So when I do have the facts, I'm able to kind of, with the training that I have, I can see if it's factual or if it's going to be BS, And like going back to what I thought with Brian, there was zero. And now at any one point did I say to Brian or say to myself, this guy's full of it. He was so true. I've never seen anybody so credible in my life, to be honest with you. And that's why I couldn't believe it took 40 years to write a book. And so that was another factor for me. I said, he could have capitalized on this 40 years ago. But he's doing it because everybody else is twisting his story around, and he wants to get the true story out. And I found that amazing, for me. That's all part of the credibility factor.
Yeah, we're on the same frequency, totally, Mike, because, again, you've got the fact it's coming from Brian and who he is, his background, that's already a layer of credibility that's hard to find. But the reason that he came out of the shadows, so to speak, to challenge the narratives, and that's what they are. People have basically used their imagination to come up with their own story. They've inserted themselves into fictional accounts of something that this gentleman here has relived every day, or at least thought about this every day since 1976 until now. And that's the year I was born. That's a long time, folks. A long, long time. That's almost 43 years that Brian has been living with this. And I really can't thank you enough tonight, Brian, for coming on and sharing your time, especially on the Kev Baker show on Truth Frequency Radio with the audience that are listening around the world right now as well. And if you had any kind of final messages for the audience out there, what would it be, Brian?
Number one, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open. And you feel, and I was told by a professional, if you're out in the woods, you think you're being stared at, you are. If you get a creepy feeling and you feel like somebody's looking at you, they are. Somebody is. Something is. Keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and believe what you see. Don't let anybody pull the wool over your eyes or take advantage of you. That's all I can say.
Absolutely amazing.
And I really appreciate you, sir, very, very much for having me on your show. It's an honor to speak with all you guys. It's great to sit down and speak with somebody like I read the book last night that's had experiences like I've had and whatnot, and not afraid to talk about them. It's great to talk to people that know what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
It's been my pleasure, Brian.
Makes you feel good. Makes you feel good.
You know, that's one way to look at it. However, I could never even dream of having a show like this if it wasn't for people like Bill Bain. If it wasn't for people like Mike as well. If it wasn't for people like, in particular tonight, Brian Gosselin. Because it's one thing, me sitting, speculating, or going over reports that may come out in the media. But it's an entirely different thing to share in the experience of somebody that was there. And remember, folks, this isn't one guy's story. He wasn't alone in the field that night. And this wasn't just one night. There were multiple witnesses to this 7.5 to 8 foot tall creature. And I believe it weighed something like, I've got it in my notes here, 400 pounds in that region.
All right.
Glowing red eyes, muscular, with hands like a man. Bill.
Exactly.
What can you say to this man? Because what worries me is, and I'm giggling because it's a nervous laugh, this is going to get more commonplace as time goes on.
Already is. It already is, Kev.
Yeah.
There's sightings of these creatures all over the world now. So at a time when the reports first started coming in many years ago, it was they would say, oh, well, these creatures are in the Pacific Northwest. And then all of a sudden, here we are in 2019, and there's reports of these creatures everywhere, including where I live in Maryland. I've had experiences with these creatures. The experience I had that night in Gloversville, New York, I walked into those woods, and like Brian said, I was being watched very much, and I felt that. And when I said, by the mighty power of Yahweh and his mighty and holy name in Jesus' name, I command you, all of you, to depart right now. You're scaring these people. And I felt that presence leave. So right. Again, this is where the supernatural aspect comes in. But I'm telling you this now. I'm reading reports of these beings coming into more populated areas now. So expect in the coming days and weeks and months and years that we are going to have reports of these creatures actually being in very populated areas.
I think that's a change in the frequency. We can all feel something weird, and I think it's almost, for lack of a better description, the merging of our dimension with the dimension where all of this lies. And it might be confined to little portal areas like triangles here and there for now. But if this veil is getting more porous and we are starting to merge, then it would make sense if we start to get more sightings further out with these areas, these hotspots that we've seen before. And before I go tonight, I need to really quickly come to Mike. Mike, you probably know I spent a few years in the army over here, so I can really appreciate, the fact that you guys, you're a brotherhood in the police. And not only that, that sense of duty and what people might not realize, and what I would like to take the time to publicly thank you for, even though I'm not American, is the fact that being a New York cop, you were there at the site of Ground Zero on 9/11. So I have to thank you for anything you done that day, sir. And as a fellow kind of serviceman,
no thanks necessary. I appreciate it. There's a lot of heroes that were there. There's
absolutely,
unfortunately
man.
There's some people that are suffering from the toxic effects of the air quality. Then, and those are the ones that are the heroes.
You see, that's the thing,
book.
folks.
The government has to stand behind them and give them the support they need, and the ability to get medical treatment.
You see, that's the thing, folks. There's so many negative stories about law enforcement and everything else, but when it comes to the crunch, some people run the other way. But men and women like Mike and Brian, they run towards the danger. They go back to fields where things have been seen that go bump in the night. And, just to really emphasize the point that tonight I think we have been privy to a retelling of one of the most important and credible Bigfoot stories ever. And I want to thank Brian Gosselin. I want to thank Mike Suppa. And finally, the man that put all of this together, my brother, Bill. Everything you said it would be, Bill, but 10 times, 100 times better.
I'm with you 100%. And again, Kev, I thank you for having us. And it really was tremendous. And I hope we can do this again sometime.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I look forward to seeing you on Thursday when we're going to talk about my new book and dig back into that again. So I really appreciate it, brother.
Sounds good to me. So, folks, we are out of time already. Can you believe it? And tune in tomorrow night for what is surely going to be another brilliant show right here on Truth Frequency Radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR and Denny touch that dial.